Hey everybody, welcome back to Your Full Crew. I'm Dawn Zoldi, one of your hosts, and I want to say belated Happy New Year. This is our first full crew of the year, and we are going to be doing these every other week in 2023. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, nice to see you all again. We've got an exciting episode. We're going to be talking about Hyundai launching Supernal. We're going to be talking about a huge corridor in the UK for called the Drone Superhighway. We're going to be talking about U.S. parts being found in Iranian attack drones. And finally, we're going to be finishing the episode off with the $414 million slap to the face that the EU has given Facebook Meta. We've got some great guests to talk about these things today, including our first guest that we're going to call out, Jasmine LeFlore. So, Jasmine, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I am excited to be here. My name is Jasmine LeFlore. I am a senior project engineer working on advanced technology solutions at Collins Aerospace, also co-founder and executive director of Greater Than Tech, all about teaching girls and underserved youth STEM and entrepreneurship together. So all that to be said, you can think of me as a multi-potentialite aerospace buff. So I'm excited to talk about what's happening in the aerospace world.
Well, we're excited to have you again because we've already had you on our sister show, Donna Drones. And we also have Stuart Smith, who, legend has it, broke his leg and still showed up to the show today. So, Stuart, tell us a little bit about ourselves. And if you want, you could share your recent war story.
Um, my name's Stuart Smith. I'm basically been a rock guitarist all my life. I was the lead guitarist of Sweet, which did Ballroom Blitz, Fox on the Run, Love Is Like Oxygen. I have my own band, Heaven and Earth. I'm also the CEO of the Droning Company, and I'm a specialist reserve police officer with the LAPD, working for ICAC, which is the Internet Crimes Against Children, which is we go around arresting pedophiles, human traffickers, and child molesters, and that kind of thing. And I broke my foot jumping over a 6-foot wall. So there you go.
Well, thank you for showing up. We appreciate you pulling it out at the last minute for us. We've got some cool stuff to talk about today. We're going to start with Jasmine's article, which is about Hyundai launching Supernal, which is an AAM kind of project. Jasmine, you want to take a deep dive into this?
Yeah, so I thought this was really interesting because a lot of people think of AAM or advanced air mobility as like the flying car, which it kind of is. It's basically a flying taxi. Think of not having to go to the airport to go to the next city or, where you're trying to go. You can just get on a flying taxi. So that's what AAM, autonomous air mobility is. So this is pretty cool because Hyundai, we normally think of them as a car business, but they launched or they did a spinoff on Supernal, which is their company that is doing the autonomous vehicles. So in the aerospace industry, I have noticed a lot of different startups doing AAM, or this is definitely being the next like big leap for aerospace in general. eVTOL, helicopter type of planes, that is starting to be like the next frontier, I'm going to say. But what I really thought was cool about this article, and I don't know if we can scroll down, but this particular company, Supernal, they are partnering with Microsoft. Azure, Microsoft has a cloud computing platform called Azure, which is going to give a lot of different cloud computing insights for the autonomous vehicle. I think working in aerospace in general, all the time, the biggest thing you have to think of is safety, but also the manufacturing of the hardware and how it's going to be operational. So I thought it was a really cool spin or really cool early adoption or early technology innovation, seeing that they're already using software to help develop their AAM. So with the Azure, Microsoft has a simulation where it can be used for drones, it can be used for AAM, but it's basically a simulator that tells the pilot or the vehicle which way to go, and the insights live. So if there's a tree, if there's something that's in the way, like it's going to ping them and it's going to provide some type of insight. But also this is kind of like more data that's being put together live that could be helping the future type of the next innovation or next iteration of that plane. So it's almost like data is being used constantly. It's being embedded in the earlier stages of this plane or this vehicle, but then it's like nobody really thinks about Microsoft when it comes to flying vehicles right away. So I think this is also a really cool like positioning statement where we think of Microsoft as Microsoft Word, Microsoft, Excel, but this really puts them in a totally different lane, as well as Hyundai as well, because we think of Hyundai just cars. And I think when it comes to like new companies working together on a very ambitious project, it really changes our consumer lens on who these companies are, what they represent, and what their mission is really about. So I just thought it was very interesting to see these different collaborators, but on more of a software level that is pretty inventive.
Yeah, and software is infrastructure. So, Stuart, what are your takes on this?
Well, flying cars, as far as I can see, I mean, in the predictions from for despite the financial predictions that flying cars and flying taxis are going to outpace even military spending on drones in the next 10 years. And it seems like everybody who's got a design for a flying car on a napkin, you've got people like Uber, Google, and everybody, Amazon, throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at them. We've run quite a few articles on the droning company about the flying car phenomenon, and it's just the traction we get is incredible. Everyone's very interested in it. It's going to be kind of exciting when you call up an Uber and it lands in your backyard or in the street in front and you fly to the airport.
Yeah, let me actually talk a little bit about where Microsoft comes from on this, because I think it's underappreciated what they do in terms of simulation, because most of us have experienced it, or if you grew up in the 90s, you did, through their flight simulator. Their flight simulator is actually really, really robust and accurate. That's the kind of the whole point of the thing. So they've been making moves over the last, I'd say, 5 years to kind of be embedded in whatever the future of flight is through their simulation software. And if you think about Satya Nadella, who's done great moves with Microsoft, actually positioning them in places like AI, like they are one of the backers between Open AI's ChatGPT, and here in flight, he's basically putting them anywhere where large stores of data need to be secure and accurate, and it's successful. So I think if Hyundai was looking for a good backer for their project, who knows how far it will go, they definitely teamed up with a good team at Microsoft. So Dom, what were you going to say? I saw you.
Yeah, I want to kind of expand on this topic because what I'm seeing are really interesting partnerships. So here you've got Supernal from Hyundai, right? An automaker with Microsoft, known for their software. We just recently saw an announcement by Archer Aviation and that they have partnered with Stellantis for the production of their Midnight. Stellantis manufactures cars normally out of Detroit. All right, so you're seeing this really interesting kind of traditional automaker, advanced air mobility connection. You've got this software piece, and then another weird connection. The cars, the flying cars, was just at CES this last week, and Sony and Honda have partnered on an EV prototype called what is it called here? The Afila. So you're seeing all of these weird partnerships between non-traditional groups. You've got the automotive industry, you've got software, which Jasmine and Stuart and Mike, all of your points, gonna be huge in all of this because the future, in fact, the present and the future even more so, is digital. And then you've got these electric vehicle makers and and advanced air mobility. Just this giant kind of connection, this giant ecosystem, and there's tentacles everywhere. And I think what you're going to see is more and more consolidation and more connections between these as things like advanced air mobility start getting networked, to the actual ground vehicles, or the ground transportation networks. So I think this is just the tip of the iceberg, and we're going to see more and more of this going forward.
Yeah, I mean, the data is important, right? So data accuracy is going to be important for how these things run, how their onboard systems are able to navigate, whether or not they are doing what's called edge computing, which is computing where they are versus sending signal back to the cloud and having larger data computated. All that has to be balanced out. And who's in charge of what is actually going to be, I think, the biggest negotiation, especially for the regulators in deciding what is deterministic and safe at whatever value that they feel it needs to be for these flying cars to actually be flying in any volume other than just, authorized flights or manually authorized flights, like individualized authorized flights. If we want an actual system in the sky, it's going to need this level of partnership, because the truth is the domains are crossing boundaries that this tech actually hits. And I think what people are realizing now, and have been for like the last 2 years or so, is that just because you're an expert in this domain doesn't mean you have the infrastructure to actually support whatever growth you want to see in the next domain you need to grow into. So that's probably where that Honda Sony partnership is coming from. There might be also some Japanese like national kind of pride working with a company within the country to make a stronger product. So that might be interesting to see too.
Mike, you just used a bunch of buzzwords that I think are a great segue to our next article. Volume,
Yeah, true.
so we're going to talk now about this super highway that's being built in the UK. Stuart, this is your article. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's something we covered with the droning company. It seems to be that they're developing this superhighway for essential things like fire, emergency, and medical supplies, deliveries by drone. And I think this sort of ties into our last conversation, because everyone's sort of talking about autonomy in the flying cars. I don't know how comfortable everybody's going to be when you have a car land to pick you up and there's no pilot. I think that's a long way down the road, but everyone's jumping on the autonomy software and that kind of thing. But I think again we're going to have to. They predicted 10 years before we really see these flying cars, but I think it's going to happen a lot earlier. It really seems to be. There's so much money and research being put into this. So I think they're going to have to develop something worldwide, like these superhighway corridors, which are designed specifically for drones, flying cars, and that kind of thing.
Mike, can I back up a little bit and talk a little bit more about this article? Because first of all, this is a 2-year project that is purported to be the largest and longest drone delivery network on the planet. And again, to the issue of partnerships, the British multinational telecom giant BT has invested over £5 million in Altitude Angel and this Project Skyway initiative. It's going to be connecting 165 miles of airspace above Reading, Oxford, Milton Keynes, Cambridge, Coventry, and Rugby in southern England. So super impressive what they're attempting to do here. They're going for it. They're going big for the largest corridor here. And corridors themselves raise a whole host of issues, but I'd love to hear Jasmine's thoughts.
Yeah, I feel like with the drone industry in general, I mean, it's here. So I think Stuart said, are people ready to get comfortable with flying cars? I think when the first airplane was created, by the Wright brothers, people thought they were crazy too. So I think there has to be a normalization of this is the now. And to the point of like regulatory, issues, I think everything has to be regulated correctly, but the community has to be up to date. Like, I think this is a really great news segment because this is what people need to be listening to and hearing to start really like training their mind to be ready that, like, flying cars, autonomous vehicles, drone delivery is right around the corner.
Well, what's
It's almost
interesting.
like next great, how everyone in back in the 90s when the internet was happening, people were like, what's the internet? So I think it's that next revolution.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, if you watch some of those old news segments, they're kind of laughable, like about the internet, or even just like something simple like the Nintendo Entertainment System. Like they would have like entire segments about how like evil it was. So there is like with new technology, there's always fear or whatever, but there's also it's usually matched with equal excitement. I think what's important about this corridor is it's working on two levels. One, it's expanding the scale for which these things can be utilized and tested within the United Kingdom, but also the use case you were talking about, having basically a lane for public safety use. That only makes people feel good when they know that that's what it's being used for, right? When that's almost certifying that every flight that goes through that thing is going to be a positive headline that helps the industry, right? So that's what I kind of found interesting about this article. Stuart, you wanted to get last licks and talk about it a little bit more?
Yeah, I think it's important that this is considered. Everyone's jumping on developing the cars and getting them in the air as fast as possible, but just the safety angle, where are they going to fly? And I think having these super corridors that are specifically designated for, the whole Biblos thing, with drone delivery and flying taxis, flying cars, they're going to have some organization. And I don't know, obviously the FAA will have the final say, especially in the States, CAA in England and that kind of thing. But I don't know where, I think this is something that needs to be considered before we jump ahead of ourselves and get these things in the air.
Stuart, you raise a great point about a considered approach. I mean, it seems obvious, right? But the three of us before we got on the show, we were talking about another article somewhat related to this. What we're seeing here as drone deliveries are starting to really occur in the United States, we're starting to see some complaints about noise, right? You've got drone up now, 6,000 deliveries for Walmart so far in multiple states. And in Arizona, I think it was the article last week talking about the Glendale, Arizona residents complaining about the noise, sounds like a beehive. So this really raises the issue of, where should these drones be flying? Is a corridor over already existing highways the way to go? There's already noise there. Like, people are used to that. You start flying over backyards, non-standard routes. Not only you're raising noise concerns, but now, at least in the U.S., maybe these avigation rights issues about who owns that, use and enjoyment of the air above their property. So, I mean, I do feel like there's a lot of work to be done here, to be sure.
Yeah, I think with it's like we did an article recently on a drone made by a company called Beluga, and they were studying how an owl wings fly, and they made the drone like about a third quieter than most. Like with any technology, you're going to have the drones are going to be quieter. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, and noise cancellation I think is going to be important. And then also we're looking, if we're talking about electric lift vehicles, they're already vibrating at a different frequency than a traditional helicopter. It's less whoop whoop and more dee 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 dee, which actually is easier to.
Yeah, I want to hear that again, Mike. Do that again.
You'll have to watch the tape. But which that higher frequency actually, it's not going to travel as far, right? So there might be, you're able to fly a little bit higher and it's negating whatever the public nuisance issue would be, versus if you were to fly that same route with a helicopter. So that's also an interesting kind of twist to the story there. The technology is going to be different, and if we know this is a focus, and if that's the only barrier, if sound is the barrier, I think that companies will work on it, and where there's a will, there's a way there. I just want to bring up a comment from Christopher Jenseth. He's talking about our last segment with the partnership from non-traditional companies into the space. It's great news and hopefully puts pressure on the FAA to get their act together. Yes, more pressure doesn't hurt, because they have limited hands there, and the more that they know it's important, the more they'll focus on it. So,
well said, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick break just to thank our sponsors. So, we are adding True Weather to the bunch. Again, second time sponsorship. Thank you so much for True Weather for sponsoring the show. Tulsa Innovation Labs, Skydio, and Airspace Link. With their support, we've been able to launch this show and continue on into 2023. Also want to thank the audience, especially Chris, for talking out right now. We appreciate the comments, and your viewership is what fuels the fire here. So we've got a great article coming up, this one from Dawn, and this is hitting on kind of a thesis you've been kind of getting at for a while now about the new nature of war, and how U.S. companies are kind of in the gray zone a lot more than they used to be. So you want to talk about it, Dawn?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a little bit of a twist on what we've been talking about before, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But this article talks about how parts made by more than a dozen U.S. and not just U.S., but other Western companies were found inside a single Iranian drone, according to a Ukrainian intelligence assessment. And so the twist I see on this is we've been talking a lot about commercial drones being employed very prolifically in the Ukraine, Russia. I guess we could call it a war now. Putin did. He started it. So I guess if he's going to call it that, we can call it that. But, we've seen commercial off-the-shelf technology, drones themselves, the companies donating drones, working with nonprofits to get drones in the hands of Ukrainian forces. And now what we see are nation states like Iran, who is supplying Russia, kludging all kinds of commercial off-the-shelf parts from the U.S. and the West into their drone technology, and using it against the Ukrainians. So the whole is no greater than the sum of its parts, and I think this article really kind of brings that home. And when you think about, again, I make these weird connections, so bear with me here. When you think about the Defense Innovation Unit's, Blue UAS project, again, that's focused on cybersecurity and Chinese technology. It's not just about the drones, the Blue framework, or the Blue UAS project. It's also about the components, which is why they have the Blue UAS framework, right? So the parallel I see here is, now those commercial off-the-shelf drone, again, non-traditional things. I mean, Texas Instruments was one of the companies whose parts they found in here. GNSS companies, Global Navigation Satellite Systems companies, that are making position navigation timing, technology that may not normally wind its way into a drone necessarily, is making its way into Iranian drones. And so how do you stem this tide? I think it's really hard, and smarter people than me are working on it. There's a task force that the Biden administration has put together to investigate how all of this Western technology is winding up in these Iranian drones. But man, this is tough. I mean, again, I walked around CES last week. I just had the statistics up a second ago because they sent their kind of end of show wrap up. But I mean, it was ginormous. And when you think of all the different, countries, different technologies out there, the fact that you can take pieces and parts and kludge them into something nefarious, you kludge them into something that's used, against innocent people in any way, is always a frightening proposition, and we're seeing that just more and more, especially in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. So, would love to hear other people's thoughts on this, and I will just start with Stuart.
Yeah, I read the article. It's well, a couple of things came to mind. Firstly, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. It's virtually impossible to. I mean, a lot of these semiconductors that are used in drones are used in TV sets. So to stem the tide of that, I mean, I think there's the way to combat this is because it's an impossible task. I think the way to really combat it is Iran is going to need some very heavy sanctions by the whole community. I mean, I just saw on BBC News this morning that there's huge crowds gathered outside the prisons because of the way the executions in Iran. So the fact that Iran is colluding with Russia, I think it's down to our administration and the whole administration of the world to really just stamp down on them and put pressure on, because, I mean, the other thing is, as I say, these components are used in everything, and you've got one of the statements that Texas Instruments says, well, we're complying with US law. Yeah, they are, but there's they know where some of these things are going, and it's the moral ground. They have to take the moral ground and say, yeah, we're complying with US law, but we need to do more.
Well said, well said. Jasmine.
Yeah, I would, again, well said, but also looking at the article, and I like how you mentioned the whack-a-mole aspect of this, but even going a little deeper to the article and seeing the quote, why do smugglers like diamonds? And he says, because they're small, lightweight, and worth a ton of money, similar to the computer properties or computer chip properties. So I feel like that kind of analogy really makes it tough and difficult to see how to have a actual solution for this. And there's so many parties that are impacted where it is whack-a-mole. It is, who did it first? Root cause. Where did it start? And do we need to develop another technology to help get this technology back in, in a positive light? So it's just so many moving parts where I feel like it's a very dense topic to really try to control, I guess. So to the point of sanctions, I mean, I guess that's like the normal start, but I have no idea how this is going to wrap up, and I'm very curious, Dawn, to see some additional articles similar to this on like what's the next step, because it is a little, I don't know, it's not a good feeling.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about proliferation on literally our last episode with Don Bershoff, and that's so the reason I bring it up is because Chris Jenseth is bringing it up in the chat. Don't leave military equipment behind in other countries. There's some truth to that, but there's also there's a reality that if you're in a conflict, that both sides are going to require armament and also even just regular supplies. And I think what was interesting about this is some of the technology is not necessarily built to task. Like Don used the word kludge together. So you might send a piece of technology that was meant for, peacekeeping purposes, or was there to kind of aid in some other troop transport or medical transport, or even just keeping people safe through surveillance. And that technology now gets ripped out and used for another thing. It's very easy to transfer a camera from a weapon system to, or from a non-weapon system to a weapon system. In fact, the gimbals are increasingly, the hardware for them is becoming standardized. So that's kind of your diamond analogy, or from the article, the fact that you seized on that. I think that's very important to kind of understand the dynamics of it. It's when technology gets sufficiently distributed like this, I don't think we know the answer on how to stop proliferation. Because where there's a will, there's a way. It's almost like ghost gun territory. I think that's the correct term. If you understand weapons better than me, please correct me. I'm not afraid to be corrected on this front. But like the idea that you can make a regulation to stop certain kinds of things from being manufactured and purchased outside of a gun store, but then other people could figure out ways to 3D print certain parts, and then you could kludge together your own gun from those parts. So it's kind of the same kind of story here, where the technology has allowed things to be distributed in such a way that you could science your way into a weapon.
Well, and we talked about the smuggling aspect, but then there's the shell game, if you will, right? Literally the shell companies that the Russians and Iranians are set up, and frankly, almost like so much of this is a resourcing issue, right? Whether it's advanced air mobility and who's going to create those corridors in the sky, how's that all going to work? We talked about that earlier. For this, it's a little tiny office in the Department of Commerce in the United States that deals with export controls, was never really set up to deal with something like this. And now they're getting a lot of attention, like, hey guys, what are we doing here? And, this is where, as Congress is looking, to legislate, they've got the power of the purse. Where's that money going? Because if people are serious about this, just like Mike, we've talked on the show about the CHIPS Act, right?
Yeah.
Putting money against supply chain, putting money against export control enforcement, perhaps. I don't know. There's only so much money to go around, and there's only so many people to do this work. But, as we see this continuing, I think this is something that really needs some serious attention.
Yeah, and you've also seen actually companies say that they're not selling in Russia, even outside of military stuff, and then their goods are still there, and they've just been like rebranded or something. So the supply chain kind of never broke down. They just put like different stickers on things, or painted the boxes differently. So
or routed them through other countries. In other words, like
sympathetic countries, or like I sold to wherever, let's say India, and then India sold to this neighbor, and that neighbor then sold into Russia, but like they established that chain and everybody profited from it. So how do you stop that when the world is global, the logistics are global, and basically you could set up a network like that over the internet? I don't know. Stuart, thoughts?
Yeah, and the genie's out of the bottle. I mean, as you're talking about things that are made for peaceful purposes being modified. I mean, people are sending Ukraine tons of drones. And they're modifying them to become weaponized, to drop hand grenades and bombs with a Mavic 2 Pro. So there's an old saying in the movie Jurassic Park that one of them said, we have the technology to do it. No one questioned whether we should. But the genie is out, and the only thing that's going to make a difference is really you can't stop someone semiconductor that's used in a car and putting it in a military drone. So you can't stop that. The only way to really do this effectively is to put full sanctions on companies that support invasions like Russia.
Yep.
Jasmine, final thoughts, and then we're gonna move on to Meta.
Yeah, I think for me, this is a subject that I, tiptoe around a little bit, because I know that this particular issue is happening, but, there are also weapons of mass destruction that the U.S. sells to other countries. So it's almost giving pot calling the kettle black, so to speak. But I don't want to get into that territory too much. So,
I mean, I'll take the ball a little bit there. Yeah, there is an issue with that. You'll see your weapons from last year on the battlefields of your enemy, because this year's ally is not next year's ally. So that's always So I mean, this is war. This is why it sucks to be at war, and anything we could do to stop the war in the Ukraine, I think, for me personally, the longer it goes on, the worse it is for everybody. So,
yeah, very true.
Anyway, so we're going to be talking a little bit more on the domestic side of technology. So Ireland fines Meta over $400 million in its targeted advertising practices. So I think the more round number is $414 million. US for violating GDPR, which is basically a privacy act that went into effect in the EU some years ago now. I remember having to prep for it at my previous company. And it's really not that hard. You just have to give informed consent. So I'm not actually surprised, especially with what they call dark patterns that Facebook uses to kind of force and pressure users into complying with their terms of service. Basically, what makes this interesting is basically the Ireland court has decided that Facebook needs to give you the option not to be used for targeted advertising, and they can't just say you can't use our service if you don't opt into that. So that's something that's new, and I think that affects not only Facebook, but it does affect basically any ads based service. Facebook and Google being the largest here, but it might actually dictate the way that Apple at least can serve you ads on their new ad program on phones. Overall, though, the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I've seen a lot of Silicon Valley people talk about the dangers of over-regulating private information and sharing information, and I'm not sure there are any dangers. The best example I gave, which I think is easily dismissible, or came across, which I think is easily dismissible, was Paul Graham, formerly of Y Combinator, talked about how medical information wasn't able to be shared during the pandemic because of these privacy regulations, not even in aggregate. Well, they're working it out, and I'm sure they'll figure that out down the line, but then we still get the privacy benefit of GDPR. I think we're all tech people here, so sometimes tech people tend to lead in the other direction, that they're kind of okay with data sharing. So what's everybody's take on this, and did Facebook deserve to be fined? Who wants to go first?
I would love to go first, honestly, because I love that Ireland did this. I love that the GDPR has this kind of right to anonymity. I think that's kind of dovetails into this ruling, this idea that, again, they use the technical term kludge. Facebook is grabbing information off of, what you post, kludging it together, and then targeting ads, at you. And it's overwhelming. I mean, Meta, Facebook, I'm just going to use these interchangeably. I know they changed their name, but, they also, took over Instagram as well. And the amount of ads that are in there, like, ridiculous. And I'll just be brutally honest here. It was like it was like New Year's Day, and I'm on my phone, and I must have had like 200 ads for middle-aged women weight loss. And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? I was like ready to kill somebody. I'm like, if I see one more of these freaking ads, like, seriously, and they were just like ridiculous, right? Like, oh, you don't need to work out, take this pill, or, whatever it was. It was just totally stupid. And I would love to opt out. Just like, think about the robocalls, right? That's something the FCC in the United States has been beating back for years, but you have the ability to opt out of those robocalls, right? There's a way you can do that. Same with just your email, whether it's a newsletter or whatever, you can say unsubscribe, so I don't see this as being anything different, honestly. And I love the trend. I hope we see more of it, honestly.
Anybody want to next take? Jasmine?
Yeah, I second that. I think it's, similar to, I think Stuart said it, the genie's out of the bottle, where it's one of these things that's so, like, big that, Dawn mentioned Instagram, like, it's happening everywhere. It's happening on LinkedIn, it's happening on Twitter, it's happening on every platform that, they say if you're not paying for it, you're the data. So for Facebook, for Meta, they really have capitalized on that. And I like that Ireland was able to push back, or is pushing back, but because they're so integrated in everyday life, including, all these other software platforms, is this going to be a trend for other, countries, or has everyone said this is just how it is? And oh, by the way, on the other side, as a user, I'm on TikTok a lot. I see people, they're becoming these, they call it UGC, content creator, universal content creator. So people are now starting to leverage, okay, I can get paid to make ads for people. I can make content and I can help Meta, with these ads. So it's almost like now the people are leveraging this data game and capitalizing on it as well. So it's almost like, which side do you want to be on? Are you going to leverage it, or are you going to push back and start unsubscribing from things? But regardless, I think it's something that's going to, we're going to keep seeing data privacy issues.
Stuart?
I'm going to go out on a limb and disagree with this. I think I like the fact that if I'm on the internet and I'm looking at something for 2 minutes and I go, all right, and then I get a call or something and I lose the page one way or another. The fact that it'll come back to me on about a day later, I'll be looking at something else and there'll be an ad from something that I was looking at. Oh, that's what I was looking at. The platform's free. I mean, maybe Facebook should have an option where you pay for it and you don't see ads, and they'll still make revenue that way. But I actually have no problems with it. I mean, certainly it gets out of control. I mean, you've got the robocalls, but the government did do something. I mean, I was getting at least about 10 calls a day about car warranty, and they slapped down really hard on those. And I'm not getting anywhere enough as many. And the scam calls, the scam calls and emails I just reply with a badge from the FBI saying, "Would you like to come and discuss it at my office?" Then generally don't hear from them again.
What's interesting though is that what you were talking about, like if you go to YouTube, you have the option to pay for YouTube without ads.
Yeah.
But there's been resistance among these companies because they don't want to pull you out of the data pool, because then that devalues the money they can make off the ad product. And Google's way of combating that on YouTube is to make the price actually exorbitant. I think it's like $20 a month to go without ads on YouTube. I pay for it because it actually got so obnoxious hearing about BetterHelp every week that I thought I was mentally ill. And that's not helpful. And I'm nothing against BetterHelp. I'm sure they do provide a good service for people who need it. But like, there's just they can't. It's like an inventory placement system, and the truth is they don't have enough inventory users to actually place as many ads that are being purchased. So they just increase the amount you see over time, and it actually becomes less useful to both parties: the client who would have purchased the product, and the advertiser who's now spending too much for people that would never use their product in the first place. But I think the most important thing about this is actually just having the option to opt out. And Facebook needs to grow up a little bit in the sense that they only want to work on the old system without providing any new option. And I think people just want the option. Most people don't even take it, so just provide it,
I just maybe there's a middle ground too, the all versus nothing. Maybe there's just a limit, right? So you're scrolling and I'm seeing my friends' pictures, for example, on Instagram, my personal account, not my business one, and then I get through 5 and then it's like 50 ads, and until I can see the next. It's like, come on, man. Like maybe there's just a reasonable middle ground. But I think the issue here, of course, is not just the ads in general. Like, okay, it's one thing just to have a random ad. Like we have 4 sponsors that we've been talking about today, right? That's fine. But it's targeting, it's grabbing information about you, private information about you. And in this case, when the example I gave of the weight loss, right, is like my age. Like they're targeting my age, they're targeting my gender, because they were all geared towards middle age. Like it's very targeted using private information, but they're like, oh, well, you put it on here. Well, I don't know. I just feel like there's a middle ground. It doesn't necessarily have to be all versus nothing.
I'll push back on that a little bit, Dawn, because truthfully, they're not that accurate. You'd be surprised what little signal they could use to derive that answer. about you, right? So, like, yeah, your age, they could actually surmise that from your cookie history with less than 3 sites. And they might be wrong actually 80% of the time, but to an advertiser, if you're right 20% of the time, I want to serve that ad 1/5 of the time that I possibly can to the right user. And I'll just eat the 80% loss as long as the cost of my product and placement of those ads is, or the money I make back from my product is higher than what I will pay for those wasted ad placements. And I think that's the story that doesn't get told here a lot. Is they're selling a lot of your data it's just not even useful at the level that they pretend it's useful. Because then that would undermine their entire business model to say that. And for what? We're not getting as much out of it anymore. The banner blindness, as somebody who used to buy this advertising, is so high that I don't even waste time on it anymore. I create shows like this, and I think traditional advertising works just fine, actually. Because you're buying the context, right? So, like, if we went to, a metal music website, and I see an ad for diapers because I'm in the age bracket, and they know I just got married because I went to some wedding site or whatever, and they're trying to, preempt the baby, I'm not going to be happy. But if they show me a new album from, one of my favorite
from Stuart,
from Stuart,
band,
then I'm gonna be hitting the buy button because the context is there. I went to the site, the rock site, for that music, and now the context makes sense. So direct buy advertising actually never got outdone by programmatic advertising, no matter how much data they have about you. And I think GDPR is just providing an avenue for users to opt out, and I think the avenue to opt out needs to be there. And yeah, if ads are what's necessary to run a system, I'm okay with that. I just have to be able to opt out, and I'll pay you if you don't want to give that to me for free if I opt out.
Yeah, there's something Dawn brought up, which was you can unsubscribe to emails, because there's certain companies I was getting twice a day. So I'd get fed up with it, and I'd hit unsubscribe, and it would take me to a site saying, well, do you still want to get it once a week? So if we had an option where, yeah, I don't want it how do you say it? So on such a regular basis, and I only want to see ads from things I've actually looked at, as opposed to things that target my age group or my profession.
Yeah, all of that should be there, and I think honestly it could improve your ad experience. In general, they're gonna do a better job of knowing you than you. Actually, it's like what do they call that in science? Like double blind experiment versus like if you know that you're being observed, you will answer differently. So
Yeah.
Or you might think like, I'm gonna lose weight this year. You might actually want the ad, and then you never go to the gym. So like our perception of ourselves versus the reality of who we are, right? The data kind of can tell them that in some cases, not all. But yeah, just having the option. I think there just needs to be options. That's all. It's not that big of a deal. I think they deserve the fine because they didn't. Every other company made moves to give you options. Every other big company, right? Like Google kind of pushed on paid services and stuff, or whatever, or gives you the ability to turn off. Like if you go to your Google profile, there's ways to turn off certain tracking, not all of it. And Facebook just did it. So I think they're just a lazy company that produces crap. That's my take on them now. I mean Meta. I'm sorry. I can't even pick up the new name. And there's companies that are like, all right, so TikTok, China stuff aside, isn't it fun to be on TikTok? It's actually fun to be there versus being on Facebook, where there's the swell of discontent grows every second.
It's like we just had the holidays. It's always like the airing of grievances,
Yeah.
on Facebook. But Mike, I think we have some comments in the chat. I don't know if you want to call some of those out.
Yeah, well, we could call out Chris's comment. So, because Diggs just said, "Hey, what's up?" So, hi, Diggs. And Christopher Jensen said, "It limits your knowledge. I'd rather not be in an echo chamber." Yeah, that's the other thing, is just the echo chamber, right? Like buying a Keurig and then receiving ads for it for a month later. What if I want to know about different types of coffee? rather than my trying to rebuy the same machine that I already bought, right? Any last thoughts before we close the show today? All right, I want to thank our sponsors again. We have Tulsa Innovation Labs, True Weather is joining us this week, Skydio, and Airspace Link. Also want to thank our guests for providing great topics to talk about today and bringing their expertise to the fore. And then also thank you to our audience for supporting the show. You make it what it is. We appreciate everything you do. We've got some great stuff coming up this week. What do we got, Dawn?
We do, absolutely, Mike. So Wednesday, join us on the Dawn of Drones. We've got Tyler Roberts from Paladin Drones talking about drone as first responder and their LTE solution that's helping save lives. We've got on Thursday in Clubhouse, Maggie Schuster's our new host there. We're going to have Modal AI. They've created the Voxel 2 autopilot, and Chad Sweet will be joining us on Thursday. And then next week, instead of the crew on Monday, join us Tuesday for the Full Tilt. We'll have Don Bershoff from True Weather Solutions and talking about leadership. So please join us for that show as well.
All right, that's it for today, and Happy New Year. We are out here.